Please bow your head. Most righteous and eternal Father, we give you thanks this morning for a beautiful morning. Mighty God, we're thankful for life, we're thankful for health, and we're thankful for a job. Mighty God, as we gather in this training of trainers session, mighty God, I pray that everything that we're going to be doing, we're going to be saying will be done in perfect order. I pray, mighty God, that you open each and everyone's understanding. I pray, mighty God, that our presenters will present with clarity and that persons will understand. Father God, I put the days proceeding in your hand and give you thanks and praise for everything. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown O'Connell. So welcome to everyone. We'll now call our session to order. Records and Information Management Month is celebrated globally in the month of April. It focuses on good record keeping across the public sector and recognizes the contribution being made in the preservation of evidential records by RIM practitioners. To this end, the Jamaica Archives and Records Department, JARD, has been hosting a series of events which commenced on Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024, under the theme, Envisioning the Future, Records and Information Management in the Age of Climate Change. In today's rapidly changing world, the impact of climate change poses significant challenges across various sectors, including records and information management. As we face the realities of a warming planet, it becomes increasingly vital to envision the future of records and information management in the context of climate change. Climate change presents a multifaceted challenge to records and information management. We have rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and shifting climatic patterns pose risks to the physical infrastructure housing vital records and archives. Flooding, hurricanes, and wildfires can lead to the destruction of or loss of irreplaceable historical documents and critical information. With that said, we extend a warm welcome to our attendees, presenters, stakeholders, colleagues, and guests. Our first speaker today is, so first we'll be going to our icebreaker. So let's move on to our icebreaker at this moment. Hold a minute, please.
Morning, I'm not hearing anything from the presenter.
Neither am I.
Okay, my apologies about that. Let's go again with our eyes. We're playing Guess the Record. No, we had gone through this already and we got the answer, that's contract. No, the other question is, I hold the secrets of each employee's past, from their achievements to troubles amassed. In folders neatly lined, I keep their track. A history stored both white and black. What am I that HR keeps with pride? And we already got that it's personal file. Let's move on to the other question, and it is, I keep track of every cent, every dime, recording earnings in an organized line. From wages to taxes, I hold the score, ensuring each payment is fairly more. What record am I?
Payslip.
So Demisha said pay slip, someone said accounting file. Let's get what the answer is. Payroll register. Payroll register. Let's move on to another one. Not quite a contract, yet still a bond between two parties, a promise fund. Less formal than law, but serious still. In words we agree, or intentions fulfill. What record am I? So not quite a contract. So Kadian said verbal contracts. So it's not quite a contract, yet still a bond between two parties, a promise fund. Less formal than law, but serious still. In words we agree, or intentions fulfill. And let's look at the answer. Memorandum of understanding. I hope this game is all jogging our memories. We're going to move on to our final question for our icebreaker session, the record. And here it is. I'm a keeper of time when you enter and exit. Every date I record, every detail complete. Your names, I hold them all tight. In columns and rows, I keep things right. What record am I?
Attendance register.
Awesome. It is the attendance register. Very important, vital records within our organizations. So I hope we enjoyed our Guess the Record riddle game for our icebreaker. We are now going to move on to introducing our speaker. Our first speaker is Mrs. Alicia Lichmore. She currently serves as a senior archivist acting at the Jamaica Archives and Records Department. With over 2 decades of experience in information management, Mrs. Lichmore is known for her efficiency, adaptability, and meticulous attention to detail. Her academic journey is marked by excellence, having earned a degree in library and information studies from the University of the West Indies, followed by a master's degree in the same field. Mrs. Lichmore's practical experience, coupled with her academic achievements, positions her as a leader in the field of records and information management. As we embark on this lecture on archival practices and information management, we're privileged to have Mrs. Lichmore now share her insights and expertise with us. Please join in me in welcoming Mrs. Alicia Lichmore. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome one and all. I must thank Ms. Blackwin for that introduction. And I am going to be first going through the objectives for this morning. After which I will move on to a very powerful quote, right? And we will be looking at studies. Now, our objective for today right? And our hope is for at the end of the session, participants should be able to identify threats to their organization's records and access to the impact and assess, the impact of loss. To know how to identify and protect vital records. And lastly, understand how to develop an emergency plan. Okay, so we are trusting and hoping that you will walk away better than you came with a clearer understanding of the subject matter. It's a lot to cover, and we really hope, we'll be able to get it done. And at the end of it, it would have worth your time to be here with us today. So, no one planned for a wholesale destruction of human assets and information assets at the same time. Do we agree with that? Anybody agree?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks for that. Right? So, looking at vital records, we must admit that vital records, I know what comes to most of us minds are the physical records that we have in our midst and that we work with daily, especially paper records. But additionally, we have human beings, persons who are part of our organization, right? And if we lose them suddenly, then this would create some kind of challenge for the organization to move forward. So again, looking back at the powerful quote, it is looking at both your information assets and your human resource assets, right? Because we can't, underscore, we can't forget the importance of our different stakeholders who would have been in the area of records and information management for over a period of time and would have gained certain knowledge that perhaps they alone would have. And, and we're going to be encouraging organizations that we ensure that we capture that tacit knowledge from the different stakeholders within our organizations who would have been there for many years and would hold certain key information that would be very vital to our operations as an organization. Now, I'm just going to take you on a little journey back to 2001. There was a major event that took place around about that period. Anybody can recall? Internationally, so I'll give you a little bit more clue. It was internationally. There was a major event that took place 2001. Anything coming to anybody's mind? All right.
9/11.
It was 9/11, right? 9/11.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. September 11, 2001, the 9/11 attack on the United States of America World Trade Center. Now, this resulted in a loss of thousands of records. And you can imagine no one knew that this was coming. And not only the loss of lives and the destruction of countless of records, only records that got out of that building were those that were taken by the survivors themselves. So, that was a big, 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 big blow to the United States of America, losing their valuable human assets, and also with the destruction, right? So I guess, you know, nobody saw this coming. And so maybe they wouldn't have had, you know, the sufficient, maybe backup systems and so on in place. So I'm sure that, yes, some things they might have been able, but as it goes down or it went down in history, they lost a lot of their records. So lessons learned from 9/11. I think there was a lot of lessons that was learned from that experience. So after the 9/11 organizations, you know, started to re-examine their disaster plan to include worst case scenarios, right? And that is what a lot of us don't take into consideration, the worst, right? Maybe for good reasons, but again, having gone through these experiences, they would have taught us that, you know, even though we're expecting and hoping for the best, we must be prepared for the worst. A survey conducted at the Disaster Recovery Conference revealed that 97% of the respondents admitted to revising their organization's disaster plan after the 9/11 attacks, right? And so, you know, having such a historic event and not learning any lesson, that would be, you know, a very, very sad, you know, thing. Even though that has happened, it would have worsened that situation to not have learned any valuable lesson, and also taking certain steps to ensure that if that should be the case in the future, the impact would not have been so great, right? So the attacks highlighted the superiority of storing vital records off-site, right? So this was another lesson coming out of that event, as opposed to on-site, as records may be lost if buildings are destroyed. Relying on vital records stored on off-site in paper format poses many, many risks, right? And so, you know, many of the organizations, they looked into this matter and they sought to have that addressed. Now, there was another very popular event that took place again in the United States, 2005. Can everybody recall what that event was? Nobody? 2005? All right, so I'll give you another clue. This one had to do with water this time.
Hurricane Katrina.
Hurricane Katrina, thank you so much. Yes, so in 2005, Hurricane Katrina swept across southern United States of America. Little attention was paid to the destruction and the loss of vital records. Items lost included medical records, school records, they had law enforcement records, court records, and driver's records, right? So they too, again, the United States, you know, again suffered a great loss with Hurricane Katrina. No medical offices were destroyed, legal evidence was submerged in standing contaminated water for months. And you know, I can recall some of those photographs that, you know, many of us would have seen on our televisions of, you know, the whole mess that took place even after the hurricane would have passed. Now, individuals returning to save records were confronted by alligators. So I don't know about you, but I am afraid of any such looking creatures. So I thought that many persons knew the value of the information that was, you know, lingering in those waters. And so they sought to see what they could have retrieved. But I guess they had another guess coming, because there was something else lurking in those waters waiting on them, right? So again, life is always the most important thing. And, you know, our records are vital, they're important. However, we must choose life at all times. And so, again, those records, we can safely know, how those were buried, right? So without records, individuals and organizations face numerous, it's a lot of difficulty in providing who they were, what they owned, and where they lived. So you imagine that all of these houses that were flooded, all of that information went, different documentation, everything. Some persons lost everything. So what are some of the lessons learned from that experience? Now, medical offices and hospitals that used electronic health records were able to continue operations and resume business much quicker. More organizations must consider the transfer of vital records to digital format. So again, when we think about digital or digitizing our records, what is important for us to remember that this is in fact a tool that will assist us in locating information at a much more rapid pace and in a more timely manner, right? However, digitization does not replace our need to care for our paper records, because oftentimes, and we know many of us have been working, all of us have been working with technology in some form or shape, and we would know that sometimes the technology fails and we must have a backup system. So we must ensure that even though we do, aspire to have our records in a digital format, which makes it easier for retrieval purposes and to answer queries and stakeholder satisfaction in general, we must ensure that our paper records are still kept in the best conditions, right? And, looking at the different laws and policies that are there to guide us as to how we ought to treat with our paper records. So, we're going to be coming closer to home now, looking at something that took place in Jamaica. There was a very popular flood that took place in Jamaica, and that was in 2016. Anybody recall this flood that took place in Jamaica 2016? Is anything coming to mind? No? Come on, think a
I'm
little.
not sure. Is it Matthew? I'm not Hurricane Matthew.
No, man, Hurricane Matthew?
Or
Ivan, no?
No, it's not. I'm not looking for the name of the hurricane, but there was a flood that took place, and I want, it was, I guess it cost, the damage was significant in a particular area or a famous road. Let me put that one out there.
Marcus Garvey Drive.
Marcus Garvey Drive, yes, yes, very good. Marcus Garvey Drive event. So I don't know, but I'm just going to see, and I'm going to put it out there. Anyone know how that impacted any records? Do any of us have that information or know of any records that got destroyed in that incident? No? Well, all right.
National Fisheries Authority lost a lot of records. They're still there.
Repeat
They're
that for me, please.
damaged and of no use right now.
Repeat that for me, please.
So the National Fisheries Authority, they would have been the Fisheries Division then. They lost a lot of records. They're of no use. Waterlogged.
Wow. Right. And also the coffee board, they also suffered a great loss in that flood that took place back in 2016. And so we can identify, with these events that, took place across the world because they were so true to us even here in Jamaica. Now, looking at the theme for a month, and we're looking at climate change, right? And records management and how we are operating in this space. We thought it prudent that we look at our vital records and, to sort of bring that at the forefront of our minds and the different information professionals across Jamaica and even across, internationally who might be joining us today, right? The importance of our vital records and caring for our vital records. So I'm going to be moving into the presentation where we're looking at vital records. Right? And we start with a definition. So vital records, and I know sometimes this is a little bit confusing for many persons, to differentiate. But again, we have a lot stored up for you, and we're hoping that at the end of the session, that will be made much clearer to you, right? How you identify your vital records and what are vital records. So those records essential to the continuum of the government business. And we looked at government, this definition in particular, because most of us, ministry department and agencies, we would be looking at government records, right? Business or organization in the event of catastrophic loss. And again, vital records for some of us, maybe what would jump out at us, firstly, is our birth certificates, or marriage certificate, or death certificates, and so on. But those are more personal, vital records. So in the context of this presentation, we'll be more focusing on vital records that, impact organizations. So the different ministry departments and agencies. So vital records, again, important to note. And I know, we are bombarded with so many records. And I know as information professionals, we're so passionate about the records that we keep, and we think everything is vital, right? But it's important that I don't know who cannot step in on this morning, but only 1 to 10% of the records that we have in our organization would be considered as vital. Right? Did that come as a surprise to anyone? I remember from a previous experience, I was doing a survey and I went to, to have a dialogue with a unit somewhere in Jamaica. And, I was saying, we're here, want to look at the vital records, or, how we identify them, to put some systems in place. And I was told everything is vital. All my records are vital. Yes. And I mean, the person, they were, serious with a straight face, everything is vital. They're all vital. And, we took the time out, and I understand, because not being in the field working, then it would be easy for us. And because we call upon different records daily in our operation to do different tasks, it's easy for us to think that everything is so vital, right? But it's only 1 to 10% of all that record that you have in your registries, in your offices, right? In your organization, from the accounts to everywhere, 1 to 10% of them are considered as vital records. Now, common classification of records in organizations. So in many organizations and divisions, department, records will be classified by use. So depending on how it is used, then would say they're active, semi-active, inactive, and transitory, are closed, right? And for many RIM professionals, we will know about closed files and all of that. Now, by important, vital, important, useful, and non-essential. Then we look at by security levels, unrestricted, public, protected, exempt, confidential, or restricted, right? So these are some of the terms or the common classification that will be used across different organizations at different times. And I'm gonna ask you all to keep your questions that we will take at the end of the session. So please make note of all the questions that you have, and we will seek to address those towards the end of the session. Now, the big question, right? The big question that many of us, might have. We're hearing about these vital records. We're hearing that it's 1 to 10% of the records that we have in our organization is considered to be vital. Now, how to identify vital records? Now, it is important that we consider carefully before we go about this process. There are certain considerations that we must take in account, thinking about trying to identify our vital records. Now, one such consideration, we're going to be reviewing the organization's mandate. So that is one of the key ways how we're going to know, that's going to help us to determine what our vital records are. So we review the organization's mandate before a comprehensive safety program can be implemented. And we can, many of us who would have maybe started certain processes like, our inventory and so on, it's a similar type of event, and it can be considered as an inventory of your records. Now, looking at the mandate of the organization, because now we're zooming in on what is vital. Now, knowing what the mandate of your particular organization, what your mandate is, will assist you in identify the records that are vital to that particular entity. Now, across government, all the ministry departments and agencies were created for a particular function and a mandate. So that now, in effect, will help us to know what is our mandate. So what are the records that would be very, very, very important? And remember, when we spoke of vital records, it's those that are needed for business continuity, in case of disaster and so on, how we're going to start up this business, right? So looking at the organization's mandate would assist us in doing so. Now, use a functional organizational chart. That again, so when we look at the chart, we know the different units, departments, and so on within the organization. And then we would be able, the persons who head these departments as well. So would would assist us in identifying, because even as information professionals, we don't know everything and everybody area, know all the records for accounts and all of that. We would depend on the person, the head of that organization, or the stakeholders, or the staff working in that area to help us to identify those records that are vital to their area. Now, determine the organization's operational, legal, and government requirements. So again, we have to know, what are the legal and government requirements that will help us identify the vital records that are, in different organizations. So again, it is important for us to take some time out to know the different legislations, the different policies, the different acts that impact our organization directly. So we can know, what records are vital. So that too will assist us in identifying the vital records. So we don't be a part of an organization, a ministry, a department, an agency, and you're not able to tell the different, laws or legislation policies that govern the operation of that organization. So if there's any information professional that is present here today That is one of our first plan of action when we leave this meeting. We're going to look, find out what are those important acts and legislations and policies that govern the operation of your particular ministry, department, or agency. Also, vital records master list. And again, going through and putting the vital records together. It is important that every ministry, department, and agency create a vital record master list. No, I can't emphasize how important it is for us to have a vital record master list. Or maybe many of us are wondering, what exactly is a master list? So this would be a list that captures all the vital records that are present within your organization. So after we have conducted our inventory and we know what our vital records are, we know for continuity for the person who would come after us to identify those vital records, it's important that we now create a vital records master list that would list all the records that are vital to the business continuity of your particular organization. Now included on this list, right? While we're not looking at the list in particular, but I think it's important that I share this with you, some of the headings or the other information that we want to capture on this vital records master list. So you look at the format that this vital record is present in, right? So we want to know, and again, because many of us were just thinking about the paper records, but we have to remember that we do have vital record existing in different formats, right? For example, electronic, we have photographs and different, the different formats, and you can name them, that you will need to identify on this master list, right? We need to say what format this vital record is in, say where the location, where can you find it, right? And also, very, very importantly, we must identify the risk associated with that particular vital record. So we create our list and we ensure that it's functional, right? We're getting the information so we know where these are in case of a disaster. We know where they're backed up. So it should not lie with one person, or so your CEO is not there, your director is not there, the manager for the unit not there, and we don't know where the vital records are. The vital records should be listed in your master location, the process, and so on. If you may, you could be identified or could be listed on that master list as well, so that you kind of have a whole picture of, your vital records, how they originated, who the process owners are, and so on. So this will make the starting up again for your business or organization a much smoother transition, or, a smoother process in general. Now design a plan of action to protect those records. And again, it doesn't make any sense. We know that these records are so vital to our operation, and we don't have a plan in place to protect these records. We must ensure that we put a plan in place that will provide the most suitable protection for the records that we're dealing with. Because again, depending on the format that these records are in, then you have to determine what is the best protection for those records. So you can imagine for electronic records, we're thinking about, whether we're going for stores, cloud storage, the type of security access and controls that we're going to be putting in place for those records. And for paper records, do we use vaults and so on? So these are some of the considerations that we would, have in mind. And it's always best for those of you who would have implemented the RIM program in your organizations already, for you to take that to your RIM committee, right? When we're having these conversations, we don't have them in a vacuum. we include other stakeholders and how your RIM committee is designed. It is taking the different expertise right across your unit, department, you know, to get that bit in from them. Again, as I said before, as information professionals, we don't know everything. And so we need to include somebody from HR, somebody from accounts, procurement, you know, the key areas that we know that a lot of vital records would be generated in to be a part of the conversation, right? So we include those persons who can, you know, guide us as to how best to protect these records and, you know, the different value. Because once they're vital, we must ensure that we are putting in the best, well, all our records, because we know we use the important records and so on. We still need them and we protect them as best as we can. But those that cannot be easily replaced, we must ensure that we have proper systems in place to protect these records. Now, we have some important characteristics of vital records. So some of the things that you can look out for in looking at trying to identify your vital records. So these are records that are crucial to the operations of your organization. They're required to protect the rights of individuals or the organization. And again, I know the HR records come to mind, right? Quickly. So we know that persons depend on these records. These are vital for people. Pension. So we don't want persons retiring and then the flood came and all the records got wet. And, you know, the accounts unit, we don't have anything to go forward in terms of calculating the different benefits and the pension for your employers or employees who would have served over the years and know at that point where they need to receive their pension. So, you know, we must ensure that these records are protected. Looking at the individuals or the organization, those records that, you know, are so impactful, you know, will help us to identify the vital records. So integral to the reconstruction of the organization, and you'd have been hearing this throughout the presentation, in the event of an interruption or disaster, right? So there are some records that we'll be able to reconstruct or we get it back and so on, but there are others that we might not be in that position to do so. So I would have touched on including the risk associated with each vital records when creating that master list. Now, conducting a risk analysis of vital records, there are some steps that we would be taking. So, you know, you want to identify the risk again that is associated with the different vital records, right? Assess vulnerability. So we have to look at it and, you know, we know based on your location and all of that, you know, what is more likely to happen and so on. So we have to look at all of those too in looking at the risk, analyzing the risk associated with the different vital record. Determine the impact of possible emergencies or disaster. So again, and, you know, further in the presentation, you'll be looking at, you know, the likelihood and all of that when the other presenter comes forward. So we have to make these considerations or take these considerations when we're analyzing our vital records. We also need to prioritize the risks. And again, you know, we are so, as information professionals and working with records, would know that there are so many risks sometimes. And, you know, even at a point where we might even feel overwhelmed, right? But we must prioritize the risk and see what is greater, what will have the greatest or the worst effects and so on. And then we'll have to, you know, do what is best and what we can, because again, you know, even though we want to do everything, we know that we can't. It's not humanly possible. And so we must prioritize the risk, right? Develop risk mitigating strategies. And again, these are very, very important in how we manage our vital records and the risks associated with them. Implement controls. And again, yes, so we know that this is a risk and so on. So how do we mitigate, right? So we have to think about that and implement the controls and ensure that these are monitored and reviewed. So just putting them in place and we're not checking if it's working, right? That can also be a disaster because we are not monitoring and we're not reviewing the system. So even for those organizations, I know that we have some that are leading and you will have your business continuity plans and all of that. I am hoping that at some point we do have a time when we put those plans to action and see how they work. We test them, right? We should always think about a time when we test these implementations or these access or control mechanisms that we have put in place to see if they do work, right? We don't want a situation where we're in the middle of a disaster or we're now at a point where we need to continue, but because we did not test the system, we are not able to use, to find our vital records or to move forward with the business of our organization. So ensure that after you're putting all that work into developing these lovely plans, that you have a time when they are tested and you monitor these in, you know, when there is a disaster. So there are several types of risks, and we have listed some here, and this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the more common ones that you might be able to identify with, right? So we have natural, when we speak about natural risks, we're thinking about those events like earthquakes and that we have, and would include destruction by water, chemicals used in firefighting, floods, water main that are broken, mold and mildew and all of that. Those are kind of natural, right? And again, for environmental risks, we think about hazardous materials or chemical spills, fumes. We think about building collapse, nuclear fallout. Well, praise God, in Jamaica, that is not so much for us, but it is in fact, you know, possible. So again, we can't be caught off guard if this should happen to us. And so we must make consideration as best as we can to all the risks that are possible when we're developing our different continuity and so on, right? Because we don't want to be caught not prepared. So we look at political risk. And, you know, looking at this one, what came to my mind is changing of government. So I know many persons, even those who are associated, like the super ministry, and we know when there's an election, how it impacts records or vital records, because we have the different ministries that might be split into different units and, you know, under different name and the different movement that takes place. And so the records are impacted during that process. And we must ensure that in our business continuity, we make provision for this. Because we would have experienced that here in Jamaica for several times, maybe for the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation would have undergone for us maybe 3 different changes, you know, over a short period of time. And so, you know, we don't, politics are, you know, is a part of who we are as a people. Consider our records, even when it comes on to, you know, political affairs of our country and so on. Also, there could be civil disturbances, labor disputes, riot strikes, you know, all of that, you know, would be considered as political risk and so on that we must consider when we are developing our plans. Now, incited, such as arson, bomb threats, sabotage, security, risk and leaks and vandalism, and all of that would, be taken care under that. And so again, as information professionals, we must ensure that in developing these plans, we think about the access level and so on for certain records, especially, well, both paper and electronic records, are we going to have prints? So when somebody access a particular document, it is recorded and we know access, what they took down, the different places that they went within that environment, that space that you keep your vital records, right? And this is very important so that we don't lose them by persons just being malicious. No, technology related risk. And I know for us, certainly at JARD, we are fighting with this one, right? To stay current and ensure that we have our equipment and so on. So when the technology changes, we're able to, move over our records to a different format that access can be granted to the different stakeholders when it's required. So we know that over time, the technology changes. And so we have to ensure that we are monitoring this activity to ensure that we are not caught with records stuck on in format that is useful to nobody, right? So we have to change with the time and ensure that we are keeping our hands on that one. Okay, so I hope that we have our questions that we have written down. We're not quite there yet. At this point of the presentation, we will be sharing with you a short video, right? So again,
Don't know if it is only me, but we have lost audio.
thanks for that. Are you hearing?
No audio coming.
Yes, but it's very low.
Okay. I can pause. Okay, it's very low. The person are not hearing?
Yes, very low, not
All
hearing.
right, so let us, okay, so let us try again. Just give me a minute, please. Thank you.
Risk assessment. Risk assessment is the What is a risk assessment? Risk assessment is the process of identifying hazards in the workplace and formulating control measures against them. A risk.
Are you hearing better now, colleagues?
Yes, we're hearing it.
Okay, thanks. We'll continue.
What is a risk assessment? Risk assessment is the process of identifying hazards in the workplace and formulating control measures against them. A risk assessment involves 1. Identifying hazards and risk factors. 2. Analyzing and evaluating the likelihood of their occurrence. 3. Determining ways to eliminate or control them. And 4. Documenting your findings. What are the 4 key elements of a risk assessment? The Occupational Safety and Health Administration 4 elements you need to consider when planning your risk assessment. First, scope. Are you assessing a product, an organizational process, workplace area? Second, resources needed. What type of training, tools, and equipment does your team need to effectively carry out a risk assessment? Third, key persons. Have you identified the personnel involved in your risk assessment planning and implementation? This can be the managers, supervisors, workers, vendors, or suppliers. Fourth, laws, regulations, and internal policies. Non-compliance could lead to hefty fines and other offenses that can spell trouble for your operation. By determining these 4 elements, you can create a solid foundation for an effective risk assessment. How to perform a risk assessment in 4 steps. Step 1. Understand and identify the hazards and risks. A hazard is something that has the potential of causing harm to people, property, or the environment, while the risk is the likelihood of a hazard to cause harm or damage under defined circumstances. For example, it could be an excavation home, and without proper barricades and warning signs, there is a risk that someone would fall in by accident. Step 2. Evaluate the risks. Consider how, where, how much, and how long individuals are typically exposed to a potential hazard. Assign a risk rating to your hazards with the help of a risk assessment matrix. This can help measure risk level based on likelihood of occurrence and the severity of potential injuries. Step 3, decide on the control measure to implement. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health's hierarchy of controls established 5 control measures for each hazard identified. 1, elimination, physically removing the hazard. 2, substitution, replacing the hazard with safer available alternatives. 3, engineering controls, physically isolating people from the hazard if at all possible. 4, administrative controls, changing the way people work. 5, PPE, the last line of defense if people cannot be physically removed from a hazardous environment. Step 4, document your findings. All risk assessments should be formally kept for future review and updates. Using an intuitive inspection software like iAuditor can turn your paper forms into hassle-free digital risk assessments and make record keeping a lot easier. To empower safety officers to perform risk assessments more efficiently, you can now report and manage risks in just a few clicks. To learn more about how to conduct a risk assessment using iAuditor, click here.
Okay, so I hope that we would have learned something from that video shared. And now, again, remember, you can always keep your questions towards the end of the session. Now, at this point, we'll be looking at the protection methods. Now, after or once you have completed the risk assessment and impact, the next step in the process is to determine what should be done to protect records and information. So in doing so, you want to make recommendations, and you can divide them again. As information professionals know, even though we strive to get everything done, we have to sometimes divide the work, right, into different stages. So even over years. So we'll have over several years, we'll have over 3 to 5 years, or within a year. So we have to divide how we're going to go about doing the protection or doing the implementation and so on to protect the vital records. So long-term, short-term plans will have to be put in place. Now, we have to look at the building. Is our building safe? Where it is located? Is the area ideal? No. So for some of us, we know that there are challenges in terms of where our records are stored or where our vital records are located. But this is certainly a consideration that we must, something, a food for thought, something we must think about in, or even if we are to be building or relocating to another area, is the area suitable for the type of records that you have and, for your vital records. The building, so again, the next point, the building is of high quality. Now, these tests and so on, there are professionals who are trained in this area that we must rely on to guide us, in terms of the structure, the soundness of the structure and so on. And, we must use a team to do this part of the analysis, or when we're thinking about protecting our vital records. So we'll have the engineers and the relevant persons coming to test our structure to see if it is of high quality. Adequate security systems are in place. Again, we have to look at the type of records that we have and determine if the security systems that we have in place is adequate to protect these records that we have. And again, we'll look at the different access levels and controls that we have in place to protect the records. We look at the physical security of the records. So do we have a 24/7 security guard? Cameras? Sorry, I'm getting a feedback. Yes. So we have to just ensure that we check for these details in, looking at the space and protecting our vital records. Adequate warning systems such as fire and water detectors. So again, in setting up and to protect our vital records, we must ensure that the systems that we are now putting in place, they are adequate and, they take care of the different type of events that we might have that may pose a challenge or destroy our vital records. The building equipment and records are well maintained and well managed, right? And I know, right? When it comes down to this one, that some of us really have a challenge. But we must ensure that our buildings or equipment, the records are well maintained and managed, right? So we're not going to have no room where we have records all over the floor in piles, right? Containers outside in the sun. All of that is not, right? Sewage, all of that. No, that's a no for our records. So we must ensure that they are well maintained. And of course, we're here, Jared is here to support in terms of, if it is that you need training for yourself, training for your staff, we are here to guide you in that regard. So you just reach out to us. Records are boxed and shelved adequately. So again, how we store our records is very important. Fire suppression systems are in place, so we did mention that. Fire and water detectors, and we can't overemphasize that point. So we're going to look at water, protection from water. Do not store. So these are some of the things that we have to ensure. And then, yes, some person might be saying, but we know this. Believe me, you know, we have to enforce these things because we still get the calls. And we know that some of our colleagues are still challenged with some of these, you know, different issues. So do not store records or archives directly next or under water pipes. So that is a definite no-no. Inspect and repair water systems regularly. And again, we spoke about that, how important it is to test our systems, ensure water control systems are easily accessible, and we know where they are and so on. We have to ensure that, you know, the right persons, the different staff, they know, right? Turn off and we have a lock off, because many persons, we don't know where to, you know, if we have a leak, where the main lock off is, and that can pose a challenge for our records if it's not done in a timely manner. So again, and these are just some common ones, and I know, you know, we're looking at floods and waterproof, the possible, and keep all materials off the floor and shelves and on shelves, right? So again, many of us were accustomed to putting a box at our feet and so on. No, this practice is not encouraged. So please, after this session, you remove all of those, install drains, etc. So, and we did speak about the water alarm again. So in the interest of time, I will not spend any more time looking at that one. So the building construction, so in doing repairs and so on, you know, we must ensure that these considerations are you know, we consider our water pipes and all of that, so we don't have accidents, or we mitigate the amount of accidents that we might have. So again, another protection, and these are some of the more common ones, right? We know fire and water is common to us. So we look at automatic fire detection systems, and we did spoke to those earlier. Install a manual alarm system, even if an automatic fire detection system is in place, right? And we know that in case we're having challenges with electricity, then if you have a manual system, we will be able to, you know, get persons aware that there is an issue, so that we can protect our records, our vital records, in the shortest possible time and avoid having a catastrophic event. Right, so we spoke to the vaults and all of that. So, you know, fire doors and so on, these are very important. You know, when you think about protecting your vital records, especially for the paper records, we have to ensure that we do have systems in place that will, you know, protect those records from fire. So, and there are many things on the market now that can be accessed to do so. So files kept on open shelves, and I'm just jumping to the ones that maybe, you know, we wouldn't have looked at, will burn much faster because the paper is left as it burns, exposing the paper underneath and strengthening the flames. So again, guys, it is important that we ensure that how we are storing our paper records is the best way. And we have to, you know, we have to look at the different system, because you'll find that for different, and depending on the records again, you know, what is best for those files. And if in case there's a fire, how best, you know, do we have them in boxes and so on? Or they're just on the shelves that, you know, if fire comes, it will burn much faster. So we have to take consideration of all these challenges that we might face in the future. right? So we check our electrical system because this is one of the main ways are, you know, how fires are started. So we have to ensure that we have a regular checkup on our electrical, you know, wiring and so on, because over, you know, after a period of time, it is necessary that we have these checks. So I would encourage you to have this schedule, right? So if it's every 5 years, I don't know exactly, you know, what time period, but we consult the technocrats and we ensure that we develop a schedule for the checking of this system or fire, ensure that our smoke detectors are working and we have our no smoking policy and signs in place to let our visitors who are coming into our space know exactly what is allowed and what is not. So we look at protection from armed conflict. So we prepare a list of vital records. So this will, you know, help us to prepare because we have a list, establish priorities for the protection of the records, copy inventories. So again, even if you do have one at the location, it cannot be located in the same room that you're keeping the vital records, right? We must ensure, and that cannot be the only list. We must have it somewhere else that we can access this record. Evacuate vital records to secure storage if an emergency is imminent. So if we know that we're expecting, you know, sometimes, you know, like earthquakes and so on, we don't get a warning. But for storms and so on, we definitely know when it is coming. And so we can be better prepared. And so if it means that we need to, you know, remove those files that may be in an area that is not the best. And I'm hoping that we do it even before we hear that there's a threat, right? But certainly, if we know that this is coming, we must ensure that those vital records are removed. Raise awareness of the importance of records and archives, right? So not just among our staff, but then our security forces and so on. And for those of us who would have been to other countries and we see the value that is placed on records, their military is very much involved in that process. And so we must take a similar approach in terms of, you know, educating our military, the police and so on, to, you know, help us to safeguard our records should in case, you know, we come upon a situation where our vital records are at risk. And I'm telling you, you would be surprised to see the investment that other countries do as it relates to protecting their records. You know, I've been to a country in China. I know that even on the grounds of an archive, there's a military base that is present there, right? And they would have gone through a whole generation of losing records and they know how important it is. And so they have invested heavily in having that system in place. Now, I am going to pause here in my presentation to allow for the other presenter to come. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you in the question and answer segment. Thank you.
How far put that? No man, you can't get that chair. I said everything.
Okay,
We
we are winding down. Thank you, Mrs. Lichmore. And thank you, Mrs. Lichmore. And I would want to really say thanks to all 197 or 94 of you who are now on the platform. So we are going to do a little temperature check. We're just going to do a check of the temperature. And don't be intimidated, don't feel threatened. Just let's see how
how we fare in this measurement. So I'd like to start at the cooler end of the temperature gauge here that we have. Let's say, how important are your records? And I'm going to ask you to respond in your chat, in the chat. How important are your records? Seriously. How at risk are they? Do you have a vital records plan in place? And I'm looking to see those individuals who are responding. Okay. No one indicating. Are you having a challenge with your records? My records are very important to the organization. Thank you, Charles. How important? How are you? They're okay. Karen Thomas say there are different levels of importance within the organization. Good. Extremely important. How are we measuring that level of importance? Do you have JCDC says records are very important and we have a vital records plan. Good. Extremely important. Marian Ibang say, good. Ministry of Finance say does have a business continuity plan that includes records management. Good, Helen. All right. So we're saying that some organizations have started the process. Records for my institution, well, we're getting the responses coming on. HR records are vital as they keep the information of staff. The records for my organization are very important. They are vital towards the planning and the day-to-day operations. Thank you, Lelika. So I'm going up the ladder now. How are you following security standards promoted by ISO and other local acts and policies? Anyone want to respond to that? How responsive is your organization towards those security issues? Do you have no access to your collection? Only those who work in the areas? It also helps to say, how do we see the level of importance? Security is very important to our records. No one responding to that question? We have a no access. Okay, Helen, good, good. The records in my organization are secure because there is a no access to general staff. Good, Tashika Burgess, good. Anyone else would like to share there? So we're here noting that the records, we need to have a security component to the records. So the next question, have you had issues with theft and vandalism in your organization? I noticed that we're going back. Carry-on Thomas is indicating that they are ensuring that the records are kept secure. Cassandra Anderson, let me go back to see what Cassandra was saying. That's NET has different levels of importance for its records. We have started the process as it relates to the vital records. Good. Can you give her a round of applause there? Security is also in place for our HR records and finance records and our company records. So that is a plus. All right, we continue our assessment, determining the vital records. Have you lost records because they were not backed up appropriately? So remember, we are not only looking at the physical, we're also looking at the electronic, those records which are in the virtual space. I am seeing here PIOJ have no access to its records. Very good, positive. And at JCDC, we have very high security policy for all levels of records. Okay, please explain the ISO standard. So if we are aware of ISO 15489, there is that component which speaks to access. Need to reconnect. Right, saying reconnecting. It's good. Thank you. So you now need to have that component. If we look at the ISO standard, it deals with multiple concerns or issues. And one of those is looking at how we manage access. Only those who are entitled to, who are so allowed to access the records. Please repeat the number. It is ISO 15489, which looks at records management of records and documents. 15489. Thank you. Thank you. So we continue. Have you had loss of records because they were not backed up? Have you changed your backup procedures? Anybody has ever had a situation like that? And so when you find that you have had those loss, it would say that the temperature gauge is going higher. You are at risk. And then have you had water leaks? Good, carry on. You're on target. But have you ever had water leaks in the past? We have known of situations where organizations have had water leaks, and these water leaks really damage records. Yes, if that happens, how do you manage the restoration of these records which may have been damaged? We know of organizations which have had fires, and when the fire brigade came, some of other records were damaged. How do we restore? That is also a critical component which we look at, and to take action. If you are one of those coming from yellow to orange to red, it is time for action. Time for action. Can I see the hands of those who recognize there's time for action and they're willing to take some action? Right. All right. So in looking at our assessment, we have a number of areas we're going to seek to identify what is the high risk area, what it may be severe, what may be a major risk, and what are significant risks. How do we respond to these risks? Necessary response. If it is severe, it means immediate attention. Give immediate attention to it where there are severe risks. And severe risk may mean that you just had a pipe burst in the area. Immediate attention. But at the same time, once you give that attention, you need to now put in place your emergency plan. But if on the other end of the spectrum, we are at the low level, for a number of organizations, you may be at the low level. The organization has proper procedures in place. You have a policy which guides that plan, emergency plan, and you are able to say, we do regular monitoring and assessment of the process. It means that you would not be caught with your pants down. You are really on target and on cue. So here is how we are going to quickly look at the risk. So likelihood of a risk. Let's quickly do some assessment within your organization. Is it likely that we'll have an earthquake? Is that a likely risk to any organization here in Jamaica? I need some feedback, please. Yes. So when we are preparing our assessment sheet, we can identify that as a likely risk. But what about war or armed conflict? What response do we have to that? Possible. I don't think I'd say armed conflict. Can I get a copy? Yes, we'll come back to that. Possible. So what about river or ocean flooding? Tsunami. Do you think there's that possibility for a tsunami? Maybe not. Yes, well, we could call it low. Moderate, right. We could give it a moderate consideration. But what about leaking pipes and drains? How would we assess that? Likely? Yes. Yes, someone say strong. How about chemical spills? I'm looking on the chat and looking for your response. Rare, but we have had chemical spills in organizations within the Hero Circle. I've had that experience, and also on the Mandela. So you have to look at where you're situated. What about vandalism or theft? I think it's quite likely for us to have theft. Yes. And vandalism. Jared can identify with that for sure. What about power outages? Power outages, strong possibility, quite likely. Okay, very likely. How about computer breakdown? Yes, it is very likely, strong possibility. So we are looking at doing the assessment, and we can always do that type of assessment within our organization. Moving on from that bit, but we are now identifying the risk, and we're going to the potential threats. What are the potential threats? Now, what about earthquake and it being a potential threat? Extremely high or very high, right? We had an earthquake in when? October, and when we had it, we had shells shifted, capsized. So that was a possibility. War and armed conflict more so than war. We could say it's medium. About river or ocean flooding, how do we treat that? Possibly high, but or medium, very high or medium, because we are on the ocean and there is that possibility. Chemical spill also, for the majority, it's low, but for those who may be in areas of that nature, we might be prone to have chemical spills. Vandalism and theft, I would say very high, possibly, if we have low security, medium, or low. Power failure, high, extremely high. And computer breakdown, we are prone to that. Strikes and labor unrest, how do we treat that? Well, high. I think we are prone to those threats, potential threats. So we are safe. We spent some time to look at what was possible. And we have looked at those forms we could also utilize within our organization to assess, to conduct our own assessment of the collections we have in place. So as we seek to conclude, vital records are indispensable assets, crucial for your organization's sustained operation and safeguarding of individual rights and interests. A matter of fact, I'd like to say that the protection, records protection and security, it is a hallmark of a good information professional. That should be that hallmark. You should be ready and always be prepared to develop a combination of prevention measures. You should be able to respond. So your documentation allows you to respond in a suitable time. So you can underscore that distinct characteristic that set you apart from other types of records, looking at vital records. What's the typical bit of our assessment? We seek to identify, we seek to assess our asset, and we look at potential threats, how it will impact not only the collection, but how it impacts persons. So we should be prepared to take action or response. Then how we consider the recovery time. So assessment and all of that, but we have not yet looked at recovery, and that will come at a later workshop where we look at the process of recovery, because disaster will happen. The important thing is to implement our mitigation measures and get the process in place for us to be supporting this program. Now, I am really pushing hard because I would like to allow you to ask some questions, because I'm sure you're burning up to ask your questions. So go ahead. If you want to, you might type your questions in the chat or ask it. So I'm looking. Anyone want to ask a question? Are there any questions you'd like to ask?
Yes, I would. Good day.
Pardon?
Can you hear me?
Someone speaking, I'm not hearing them.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Adine, we're hearing you.
When is the next workshop? Within a quarter or so.
Okay, my question is there a, Alicia spoke about the...
Your voice. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Good day, everyone.
Good day.
Alicia, in her presentation earlier, spoke about the Vital Records Master List. Is there a template? Because I know she was speaking to some headings. Is there something that you have that you could share with us that we could...
Speak again. We lost you at some point, please.
Oh my. Okay, are you hearing me better now?
Much better, please.
Okay. All right. I'm sharing that Alicia shared earlier about the Vital Records Master List.
Good.
And I was wondering if there's a template that could be shared with us, because I know she spoke to one or two headings that must be a part of that. I would appreciate some feedback on that.
So we'll share with you a template to support that master list.
Okay, and just to add to that, no, different organizations, the master list might look different. So we will support you. So if it is that you're putting that together, you need some support, you can reach out to us. But we wouldn't want to do one wholesale for everybody. I just pointed out some of the key things that should be present in that. However, we would prefer to really look at your organization and the type of records that you have and design something for you, right? But I did highlight some of the main headings that you should carry when you're developing this master list. However, you'll find that maybe for some entities, there are other things that needs to be present on that master list. So we would certainly support if you reach out to us in terms of designing the right set of headings for you and what your organization needs to capture.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other question? Pardon? Yes, the slides will be shared.
Sorry, good morning. I had my hand raised, but let me go. All right, morning, everybody. So my quick question, I know you said, well, somebody asked about the next workshop, and you said the next quarter or something to the effect, but my particular question is the workshop as it relates to disaster recovery. I'm really interested in that. So is that the one that will be the next quarter?
We have not yet finalized that, but we are working on giving a plan of the presentations for the next quarter. So each quarter we intend to have, and then we'll finalize with you, share what we have arranged for your workshop for each. So it would be good if you try to be present for all 4. So this is the first, and we'll be sure to share the others.
Okay, all right. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
My question to you is pertaining to vital record, which is personal finance.
Okay.
Persons who used to work in the system like from the 70s and 80s, and they retired, and they come back to get information pertaining to their pension, and those files cannot be found because there was no computer at that time to log things and so forth. We wasn't in the system at that time either, and the information cannot be found. What can be done about that, or who should be responsible for that?
All right, that would be a matter to have further discussion with the HR department, because in truth and in fact, we recognize there are some gaps within the process, how records have been managed in previous years. And we're seeking to remedy that matter with the RIM program. Some of the files can be reconstructed, meaning the concept and the timeline, but that would have to be addressed in relation to each organization based on their unique needs. So that would be a matter for further discourse, Ms. Reed, with your organization's HR team.
Again, sometimes person would ask, like Ministry of Finance, if they have any information on the person. But I don't know to who they speak, but sometimes they say they'd have to use the access to information to get the information.
All right, so once you work in government, usually Services Commission would be your next go-to, but the organization should be the first point of interaction, and then we move on to reestablish whatever records may have disappeared. Because it can be reconstructed based on the fact if they have their personal records, for example, they have pay slips and those are evidential. So remember, for records to be managed, we need to keep all records to support. Oh, and accountant general, we may also go to. I trust I've answered your question, Ms. Reed.
Okay, then thank you.
You're welcome. Our next question comes from Ms. Nangle, Suzette Nangle. In the event of a disaster, whether fire, earthquake, should we leave doors open for easy access, even though we may have security concerns for our physical, vital records? Now, remember, so vital records should not be considered only for your location. So just in case you have a fire or an earthquake, remember your vital records should have a secondary storage space. So I trust and hope that we understood this. So you may have a security situation because within that space, a wall may have fallen down or the door is unable to be locked. But whatever may be the situation, you might find that you should have a secondary storage place with for the vital records to be accessed. Have I addressed your question?
I'd just like to add to that. again, you have to evaluate. So you asked if the doors should be left open. You would have to assess your situation at that particular time. But what we do recommend is that no records should be left unattended. So if you're going to do so, you must have a security guard in place, because again, depending persons might have the best intentions, right? Going in to save the records, and you create more damage than anything else. So you must have somebody who is there, you know, to man. And that is why, again, the vital records, the business continuity plan, sorry, is so important. So that would be a guide to tell you exactly how you will operate. Because again, you know, putting this plan together, you would have looked at all the different, you know, different things within your organization or factors, right? And so you design the best plan based on the different challenges or the types of records that you're dealing with and so on. And so again, for that situation, it would have to be a case by case and exactly what is in your business continuity plan, right? But ensure that your records are always protected. All right, just to add to that response.
All right, thank you. And I'm told that Christina Fullerton, you have a question?
Good afternoon.
Okay, we're looking in the chat. I think somebody had placed, huh? Okay, a question about retention schedule.
What's the recommended retention time period for supporting documents? And is there a retention and disposition listing available online?
All right, so first of all, I hope, well, I'm suspecting that you're not on the RIM program, right? And you should get on board, right? So the retention schedule, remember, or maybe for those of us who are not so familiar, I know that some of us are new to the information profession. Now, retention schedules are developed based on your organization and the records that you have. So remember, this is not an activity for the records manager or the records officer alone. And we recommend that you have a RIM committee in place and your records are appraised and you develop the time period. So yes, there are certain documents that we use to develop these and acts and laws and policies, right? We have the GOJ 2018 RIM policy, and we have the access to information. We have, you know, the different documents that would consult in terms of the time that would be allotted to each record. Again, the purpose that they serve and so on. So a retention schedule, it might differ from entity to entity. The time periods, though, yes, they might be different as well. However, for some, I know the standard that you're going to have for your financial records and your HR records and so on. But that is something that we look at individually with the entity. So in terms of online, no, again, because of the nature of retention schedules, you know, where they're developed for organizations and they're specific to your organization. Yes, there are standards in some cases, but in some cases, it depends on the type of records that you have, what you use them for, how often you are audited for these, and the inherent value of those records. So there's no retention schedule that is online presently, but JARD guides the different entities, you know, in preparing their own retention schedules.
All right, I'm seeing also another question. Is JARD contemplating adding the vital records plan as a part of the RIM implementation going forward?
Wow, and that's a good question. I'm sure that you will be made aware. We will be reviewing, you know, the implementation and the strategies that we have been used. So we'll be looking into that. But let us see, you will be the first to be informed, right? I'm sure we'll reach out, we'll let you know, but we will be reviewing the implementation to see, you know, how best we can serve our stakeholders better.
All right. There is one above this one. during fire, earthquake events, what comes first, personal safety or the records? Well, I don't think we need to tell, I don't think you need to tell you that, Christine. You know the first thing, personal safety.
Right, but again, so we're gonna ensure that the systems are in place to protect the records, so the fire safe cabinet and all of that, right? So there are systems to protect the records, but please, Christine, don't wait, get out. Get out, all right?
And the fact is, once we have our emergency plan in place, we won't have that issue in mind because we would have had everything in order to facilitate that process. Next question. How does one get JARD to conduct an appraisal for the organization? This is another organization I don't think is a part of the RIM program. So for you to be a part of the RIM program, you need to come on board, and the process is outlined. It is strategic. It is step by step. And so individuals will be able to
right. And I'm sorry, this is Camille, not to burst your bubbles, but we don't appraise the records necessarily for you, we guide you. Right? With your team, we will guide you as to how you go about appraising. So we'll do presentations to your RIM committee or even your staff and training if that is what is required. However, remember, you are implementing, but we are guiding you through this process. So you're not left alone, not knowing what to do. We'll be there to guide you through the process. All right?
Yeah. I noticed the question on retention of personnel records. What is the retention period for these records? And what's the authority document on this? So the retention period, we make reference to the FAA Act, and you can always, Celia, you can always consult that, and we do give that support. But we have not deviated from that direction. Natasha, the only retention schedule available online, and really, here Natasha is responding,
right.
The FAA Act.
Right, and that one might not be or take everything for your organization. So again, that is why we said you have to develop based on your organization and your mandate and so on, and the records that you have. So again, remember, yes, there are standards, and the FAA Act is one of the standards that we use. The Access to Information Act that, 70 years for access and so on. So most of our records that are not so permanent, you'll find that, we would assign a 70-year period to those, right? But again, this is an individual activity, bearing these acts and so on in mind in preparing that document.
All right, thank you. So going forward, will there be a cloud storage for records, and who will have access to these cloud storages, cloud files? It means going forward, Peter Gay, is that we are planning to keep abreast with the technology. We cannot give you conclusively at this point how or where the storage will be, because that might be $1 million outside of JARD's decision, because this is where we deal with the technological team within government, which is being revised and redesigned.
Right, and also additionally, that's a decision for your organization as well, because organizations do pay for cloud storage and make their own arrangements. So if it is that you're asking if government has a national one, the answer to that is no. But individuals and eGov has been really helpful in providing, those type of storage. So for entities, but who are thinking about going that route, they can reach out to eGov, and I'm sure that they will guide you as to the steps and so on. But that is something to be budgeted for. So entities, we have to, the RIM managers, you have to start the conversation and get the buy-in with your CEOs and the head of entity to have that allocation, that funding, so that you can explore and use some of these facilities that are external to your organization and important to the safety of your vital records.
Shana is asking, can JAR develop a retention schedule based on the general records and each organization can tailor it? JAR is in the process of
Yes,
dealing
so
with that.
yes, so we know that, you know, we have been getting the request and we know that there's a need. And yes, we're going to do a general retention schedule that will there to guide it for the general areas. However, you will have to have the conversation with your RIM committee, your head of departments and units and so on to do a comprehensive retention schedule for your organization. So yes, we're working on it for this year. And we're just hoping that we'll be able to release it soon. We call it back to another meeting is to launch our retention schedule. So pray for us.
Another question coming now from Elaine Hamilton. Is having a secondary storage the same as archiving your records long term? No. Secondary storage, remember, if you could recall the presentation, way up in the presentation, we looked at how we classify the records based on use and importance and all of that. The secondary storage for vital records. So we are not saying that you have a secondary storage for all your records, but you're seeking to have a secondary storage for your vital records because these are the records you would require to re-establish your organization in case of a disaster. So this secondary storage cannot be treated as archiving your records. I know we tend to have that misunderstanding between the archiving of electronic records, which is the popular term used in the technical environment. But we in Jamaica Archives and Records Department do have an archive unit which seeks to preserve the records which are to be kept for posterity. So we do not wish to misinterpret what is that term archiving, what it means. I trust I have clarified your question. All right, I noticed. So we are saying, is there proper security in place for these records online? Well, each entity, Nadine, will have to determine that. It is the responsibility of the entity once you enter into an agreement with an organization to digitize your records. There is that component which should be included as you look at levels of security access. So colleagues, thank you very much for participating and for asking such very valuable questions. Yes. And we look forward to the next workshop that will seek to empower and allow us to feel a part of. Now, just pausing before we close off, I noticed we had online more than 109, about 196, over 200, and we are asking that these individuals, please come on, join the RIM program so that we have more individuals participating and we'll be able to do greater advocacy with our government as we seek to build out and direct your organization in establishing a more solid RIM program, so that once you have completed the manual, you will have that support to go on into the electronic. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was a pleasure being here and answering your questions. So we look forward to seeing you in the next session, right? So you will be informed. Yes, you're welcome. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.
We'd like to thank Mrs. Alicia Litchmore and Mrs. Claudette Thomas, our government archivists, for their stimulating and engaging presentations. So we understand clearly that to navigate the future of records and information management in the age of climate change, several key strategies are essential. Firstly, we need to do proactive risk assessments and disaster preparedness. And these are crucial for identifying vulnerabilities and implementing measures to safeguard our records and information assets. At this moment, I'm going to introduce our speaker I'm going to introduce Mrs. Joan Brown O'Connor to come with the vote of thanks for our session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. A beautiful afternoon to our honored guests and participants. William Arthur Ward, a motivational writer, wrote, "Gratitude can transform common days into Thanksgiving, turn routine jobs into joy, and change ordinary opportunities into blessing." So I am delighted to have been given this privilege to propose the vote of thanks and to acknowledge the contributions of those who have worked hard to make this session possible for remote training the trainers. On behalf of the Information Division and the Jamaica Archives and Records Department in the Office of the Prime Minister, and all our valued participants, I extend my sincere thanks to you and to God for allowing this session to be possible. I especially thank our moderator, Ms. Kimberly Blackwin, who ably carried out this task. Thank you very much, Kim, a job well done. Special thanks to Mrs. Litchmore for her informative and educational session on vital records. She gave us an insight on identifying our vital records, assessing the risk, and taking steps to protect them. I would also like to thank Mrs. Claudette Thomas, Government Archivist, for temperature gauging us in managing our vital records. She assisted us in identifying potential risk, assessing the impact, and recommending measures to mitigate and respond to these disasters. Special thanks goes out to all our participants for engaging in the various activities and asking questions to ensure a culture of understanding. Thank you all. Sincere thanks to our organizing team whose dedication ensures successfully executing the training for trainers sensitization session. I thank you all. Have a wonderful evening all. Thank you very much.